Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, a window into the soul of the North Fork of Long Island. We'll delve into the pulse of our community, its pressing issues, promising opportunities, and the rich stories that weave our shared history. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 96, we sit down with John Sullivan, a Greenport native who takes us on a journey through time. Growing up in the 40s and 50s, John shares vivid stories of his childhood and his family's history, as well as how Greenport shaped him during those formative years. From schoolyard memories to reflections on the town's transformation, John paints a rich picture of life in a bygone era. He also opens up about his path beyond Greenport, from college to a fascinating career that led him to Virginia and eventually to work for the CIA. So I hope you enjoy episode 96 with John Sullivan. This episode was recorded September 12th, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
I as well.
And so could you give us a little introduction, just where you were born and raised?
Okay. I was born actually in London, Connecticut. We lived, my father and mother, we lived on Fisher's Island, which is part of Suffolk County, but it belongs to Connecticut for some reason. And we had to go to Connecticut to the hospital. So I lived on Fisher's Island for the first 11 months of my life. My father died when I was 11 months old, and my brother had just turned two, I guess. Yeah, and we moved to Long Island because it was part of Suffolk County, and Suffolk County Social Services were responsible for getting my mother and us off Fisher's Island because that was a very, very expensive place to live.
And in terms of your ancestry, how far back can you go?
I'm first generation American. Both my father and mother were born in Ireland. Now, I can't recall ever meeting my father. As I said, he died very young.
Okay. And do you know where in Ireland they were?
My father was from Cork. My mother was from Dublin, and I've been to Ireland 5 times. I've visited Dublin and Cork.
And do you know, did your mom say how they met?
Yeah, absolutely. My mother was working at the Catholic Rectory in Forest Hills, Long Island, and the priest on Fisher's Island got sick, and the priest in Forest Hills asked my mother if she'd go out and take care of this priest on Fisher's Island. My father was the gardener, caretaker, gardener for the church on on Fisher's Island. That's where they met.
And in terms of them coming over to the US, did they say the reasons why, more for just
I think it was
economic reasons?
financial reasons more than anything else. A better life. My mother had a third grade education. I don't know. I doubt my father had any more, but as I say, I never knew him. And my father came over, oh, I think in the late 80s. My mother came over in September 1929, just before the stock market crash.
And then what was the reasoning that they moved to Southold area?
Oh no, my father died. He was buried on Fisher's Island, and then we moved to Greenport. Had to take us on a boat, a private fishing boat. And I can remember all our furniture was in, and I took a nap I still remember that. I took a nap on the deck of the boat on that little bed we had.
Because there wasn't like like a ferry boat.
Oh no, it was a small fishing boat. You see a lot of them in Greenport, just one deck. Small, comparatively small boat.
And then did you have any siblings?
I had my brother Bill, who's 11 months older than I. He passed away a few years ago.
Okay. And so what did your mom end up doing for work when you got?
Well, she ended up well, I know we were on welfare for a while till I was about 3 or 4, maybe 4. And then she got a job as the maid in the rectory, and she also was a cleaning lady. Well, she also worked as a maid in the Wyandank Hotel, which is in Greenport.
Mhm. And then you said the welfare until 3, but were you on other social services even through middle?
No, that was not, well, not that I really know of, but I knew, and I can remember. I must have been. I couldn't. Well, this was in Greenport though. I can remember my mother was working a lot. The lady, her name was Mrs. Chase, and my mother was, in a way, my mother was kind of terrified of authority. I mean, she's very subservient, and just gave us authority. And my brother broke down, and she changed her mind, and that was it. So
Mm,
my mother got off welfare as soon as she possibly could. And I'll tell you, she was working 7 days a week.
wow.
It was tough.
So she wasn't around the house as much.
No, not a lot. Really, when we started school, well, there was a lady, Mrs. Julia Heaney, who took care of my brother and Bill. I think I was probably 4, my brother was 5, and he started school while she was taking care of us, and we stayed. I got taken care of it until I started school, and then when we were both going to school, then you know we didn't take her anymore. But that was a family to us. The Haney family was very, very close and very influential in my life.
Mm. Were there a lot of because your mom probably had an Irish accent and
Oh, oh,
or like
it's
they might say the like a brogue.
oh, bro. Let me tell you. Now, this is very interesting. Now, when I was junior or senior in high school, my English teacher, Mr. Tompkins, really good guy. We worked on a project in a school shop one day, and there was a girl in our class named Diane Woodward, and her mother was from Ireland, and my mother was from Ireland. They were church friends, and I thought Mrs. Woodward had a really strong accent. And when Mr. Tompkins, the teacher, he said, who is Diane's mother? I said, Mrs. Woodward, the lady with the brogue. And he said, what? Not as bad as your mother's. I mean, people could hardly understand my mother. I couldn't believe she had a brogue. I mean, I was shocked when someone told me that, your mother has a real brogue. Now, I used to answer the telephone for a doctor who when he went out for dinner or something with his wife. And one day I couldn't make it, so I suggested, well, doctor, he was a doctor, but my best friend's father. And I said, my mother could probably answer the phone for you. People who called the doctor couldn't understand my mother.
Mm.
It was kind of humorous, but it's the way it
Yeah.
was.
Well, do you think there had to have been some prejudice with
I really never noticed. Seriously, I never noticed any prejudice. Greenport welcomed us with open arms. I never really noticed any prejudice.
and was in terms of describing Greenport even as a child, what do you think the demographics were? Was it like a Irish, Italian,
No,
Polish?
I would say top two, Polish and Italian, then Irish, German. I knew 6 Norwegian families, really good, really good people, but not many Latinos, very few. There were a couple of Filipinos, but I don't recall. I really don't. I know a French family, but I really don't recall any Hispanics at all.
Yeah. And then there was the African American
Yeah,
population.
that was a fairly large uh, part of the popular, demographic.
Yes. And also, as a child, what activities would you do on the weekend or
Nothing. I mean, the big thing on the weekend was going to church. Other than that, I
you
really
wouldn't play outside or
not not very much. I mean, this might sound strange, but we really didn't. We started going to mass every Sunday when I was 4,
at St.
and
Agnes?
yeah, St. Agnes. And my mother would often, in my opinion, too much, leave us alone to go to like midnight mass at Christmas, and we'd be there alone. And I was really I didn't like that a lot. It just bothered me. But other than that, no activities. And well, the worst time when I went to kindergarten just in the morning, and then I'd go home to an empty house every, every afternoon. And that was very lonely. And I can remember. I remember one afternoon there were a bunch of magazines, a magazine drive for this was during World War II, collect paper and whatnot. And I can remember sitting on the curb outside my house, or outside. We rented an apartment on the second story, but I remember sitting there thumbing through Life magazines, and every time the sun would go in, I'd start to cry. When the sun came back out, I stopped crying. It's just one of the memories I had as a kid.
Hmm. And how old were you during
5.
during
At
World
the
War II?
time I was 5, and I
Yeah.
remember one of my biggest memories. Now, really, we were brought up Catholic, and I mean serious, serious Catholic. And
Yes.
we had a little holy water font on the door going outside.
Now, was there another story I think I remember hearing where you had wrote, was it during World War II in terms of housing? There was a guy, was it Emilio un Giorgi?
Oh, absolutely, amazing, Georgie. He was a wonderful man. He was a garbage collector, and as good a guy as we got evicted from one house, and my mother got locked out. He came. He just went and got the keys from the landlady. Went upstairs, took all our furniture out, and he found a place. I mean, he was just an absolutely wonderful man. Yeah, me and you, Georgie. I loved him.
Yes. And did you also have, even during the cold months with no heating?
Well, I'll tell you, we had central heating. Now, the house where we lived the longest, we didn't have central heating. And I would wake up in the morning and there was ice on the inside of the windows. It was really cold. And I just hate being cold, but really, the winters were tough because we had no central heating. We had a wood stove, and we cooked on it, got warmth on it, but there was no central heating. And I didn't like winter. It was just too cold.
Hmm. And now, were you more in middle school post World War II?
Oh, let's see. I started kindergarten in 1944, so 4 or 5. Yeah, the war was ending. I can remember being asleep, taking a nap when the war in Japan ended, and the people out on the streets were just screaming. Oh, it was just wonderful. I see people were crying. That was a very memorable experience.
Yeah. And in terms of the late 40s into the 50s, how was Greenport, the post-war? Was it a struggle economically?
Yeah, because the shipyard was the shipyard during World War II. The shipyard was going 24 hours a day, and people would come from long ways just to work in the shipyard. Well, when World War II ended, it really hit the shipyard workers very hard. And there was a great big fire. And I remember I was 6 years old in first grade, And it was a Sunday morning. I think it was in February, but it was bitter cold. And I can remember the fire whistle going off and just kept going off. And during Mass, people were getting up to go out to go back and fight the fire. And it was a horrific fire. But I remember that very well.
Hmm. And also, how was school at this time?
Well, for me, I wasn't a really good student. And but I'll tell you, the teachers cared. But on my first day in kindergarten, when my mother left me at the front door, I didn't want to go. And the kindergarten teacher, Miss Loper, she actually hit me. I mean, she slapped me on the arm, sit down.
Oh no.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And then were you involved in any sports?
Oh yeah, I played. Yeah, I was on the football, basketball, and track teams. Not a good, believe me, not a good player. I mean, I was never a starter. Uh, the coach liked me a lot, but I was 105 pounds, rather small. And I can remember, uh, I thought being on the football team was one of the best experiences I've ever had. Coach Jackson liked me, but I was too small. And I can remember my freshman year in high school. That would have been 52, 53. But that football season, we went undefeated. It was really great. We won our first three games, and things were looking good. I played in two of them, but not long. But anyhow, our first home game was a big deal. We were undefeated, and everything was going good. Going well, excuse me. But during the first quarter, I'm standing on the sidelines with my helmet in my hand, and Tony Valinsky, one of our halfbacks, he broke away for an 84-yard touchdown. And when he went across the goal, I had my helmet in my hand, and I lifted it up and hit Coach Jackson right in the mouth with my helmet, broke one of his front teeth. Only one guy didn't play that night. You can guess who it was, but I loved it. Being a part of something that successful gave me a status I never had before. I was the smallest guy on the team, and I loved it. I mean, I'm still in touch with some of the guys. Harry is one of the guys I played with.
Hmm. Yes. And then in terms of subject matter, what did you enjoy the most in terms of the classes?
The class I have to say, history was my favorite because I was a voracious reader, and for history, all I had to do was memorize. I mean, no great thoughts. I was terrible in the math and science classes. I really was not good at all. And and I'm not saying this was an excuse, but for most of my life, young years, I went to school without a breakfast. My mother would give us a quarter uh, before we left the school, and I'd go get a candy bar. And in the afternoon, I'd get a Coke, and that was it. I mean, I I was hungry a lot, and I think that I don't want to make it an excuse, but I just wasn't well nourished. That's all there is to it.
Would you have just a lot of potatoes and
Well, my mother wasn't a very good cook, but a lot of meat and potatoes. That was it. I have never had a salad in my life, nor have I ever had a cup of coffee.
oh no.
That's for sure. I mean, really, I'm not, that's the way it was.
That's what you grew up on and
Yeah, absolutely. And now my brother, he really likes salads and stuff. I don't know where he ate them, but my brother would eat anything, and I'm a very, very fussy eater. And I'm not proud of that, but you know, it's,
you wouldn't get anything from the fish markets or
oh
anything.
no, no, rarely will I would go fishing, catch blowfish, and we'd cook those. But other than that, we wouldn't. And the only seafood I like is bay scallops, and they're the best. I mean,
Hmm.
I really like bay scallops.
Yes. And also during this time, was there a lot of bars and just with
Oh
people
yeah,
working
oh yeah. There are a lot of there were yeah, there are a fair number of bars.
at night? Like usually at the bars, would there be some fighting or
Like on Saturday nights, occasionally, yeah.
yeah,
Uh, like Bill Worth's bar, which was right across from the Paradise Suites,
yeah.
next to the A&P. Now there were a lot of fights there, but no more than usual. But yeah, oh yeah, Saturday nights could get kind of rough.
Was there gambling?
I didn't know. Oh yeah, I know. Let's see, at least three bookies that were in Greenport. I mean, they're
Yeah.
big time. I mean, big time bookies. Now, you know where the Sportsman cigar store is, right next to the blacksmith shop. Okay, that
Yeah.
was Almatosha, and I liked Almatosha very much. But he ran a card game. That I mean, there are guys that lost their house in those card games, and they also there was a numbers game going, and I worked in the bowling alley, Santa Cruz's bowling alley,
Hmm.
from for about 40 years, and we would go over to the cigar store with pinballs when we weren't setting up pins. Al let us watch TV. I watched the Ezra and Charles fight and stuff like that. And that was pretty good. But there was a lot of gambling there. It was big time gambling.
What about, I've heard the prostitution.
Oh yeah. Well, there were two really famous. Now, excuse me, for the African American community, there were two houses of ill repute. Len Jones is one, and Madame Pam on Sixth Street was another. And during the summer, when the bunker boats were in and out, there would be a parade. I mean, a parade from the shipyard, right where the shipyard was, from the bunker boats. There'd be a straight up past the Catholic Church, turn left, go down to the Howardville Review. And I can remember the priest, Father Holmes. He was absolutely outraged by that because these guys, I mean, we're talking a parade of guys who were losing there, and the police would make just a raid occasionally just to show the people they were doing something. But
It wasn't so obvious.
yeah, but there'd be raids. I mean, club wielding, head breaking raids.
Yeah. So that was just part of the community at that
Yes,
time.
yes,
And then was there another bowling alley, Schiavone's?
yeah. Scallones. I worked at both of them. Yeah. Now,
Were
what's really
those two, were those both Italian immigrants?
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But was that a good experience working there for the most part?
Yeah, well, I'd say anything, but I was making more money than my mother, and it was
Wow.
just it was good, and I would play the punch board and win cigarettes. Or my mother was a chain smoker, but she didn't never smoked outside the house. A lot of people didn't even know she smoked, but she'd smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day.
Wow. And then also what about the movie theater?
Oh yeah, I went. The first movie I saw was Lassie Come Home. And my mother, well, the landlady where we were living, her kids were going to go see this movie on Saturday afternoon. And it only cost 19 cents. So my mother let us go to the movie. And I love movies. I really do. I haven't been to a movie in over a year. But, I have TV, but that was my favorite form of entertainment.
And you would go pretty frequently.
No, just on the weekends.
Okay.
And it cost at first it cost a quarter, then it went up. No, 19 cents at first, and then it went up to a quarter.
Wow.
But one of the interesting things is when I was in junior high school, there were two shows on Friday, Saturday, and I could get finished at the bowling alley. But by the time I was getting finished, the first movie was getting over, I'd sneak in and watch the movie. But Jim Quattrochi, the manager, I know he knew I was doing it. He just never stopped me.
Yeah. Did your mom work there?
Oh yeah, she was a cleaning lady in the
Okay.
movie, and I'll tell you, this is a really kind of a bad experience for me. First grade, before classes started, I got in a fight with a kid. We're only in first grade, but I got in a real fight with him. And he said, I'm going to tell the principal on you. I'm going to tell the teacher on you. And I got scared. So I just ran home. And what do you call him? Truant officer that rode around on a bicycle. Bill, his name was Walden, but they were looking for, kids who didn't go to school or playing hooky, if you will. Well, I wanted to go down and tell my mother but I didn't know that the truant officer had already gone down and told her that I was playing hooky. So I walked into the movie, and she's down cleaning out between the aisles. And I said, Mom, and she said, don't say a word. You wait right there. And she came up and she found someone had left a cane in the movie. And she beat me black and blue and dragged me back to school, took me into the first grade, said he won't play hooky anymore. I mean, she literally beat me black and blue. Not because she thought it was so bad, but I brought attention to her that she didn't need.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and also at this time, would you hang out at Paradise Suites or
Not
something?
Paradise Suite, Rouse's.
Rouse's.
That was the place to go, and it was really popular. I mean, really. While I was playing football, couldn't go, and I was manager on the basketball team, couldn't go. But if any time I didn't have to go to practice or had a free time, you went to Rouse's. That's all there was to it.
What would you do there?
You just sit around, listen to the jukebox. I'd get a Coke, and Mr. Rouse was a good guy. I liked him a lot. And two ladies that worked there were really nice ladies. But that's just where you went. I mean,
Yeah.
very popular.
Yeah.
The girls went to the Paradise Suites. Paradise Suites had the best ice cream, homemade ice cream. It was really good.
And you said you hung out with Harry, Bob,
Oh, Harry
Jenny.
Bob, he was one. There were some other guys that Bill Levine was really, he was one of the best people, just as a really, really great person. And then I used to hang out with Mike Kaplan and Carl Lutz and some of those people. I never had a girlfriend. There was never any, so I couldn't dance. One of the few kids in my class that didn't take dancing lessons as I was working in the bowling alley. And that's one of my real regrets.
Yeah. And then you said church was important.
Oh,
Was it Father Holland?
it started with Father Cal, and then Father Holland, and it was Father Holland was the most memorable. But I was an altar boy for a long time, and it was a big deal for me. But from the time I made my first communion, I didn't miss a mass on Sunday till I was 27 years old.
Wow, that's amazing.
And that was in Germany when I was in the army, and I'd gone out to a party the night before and overslept the next morning, and there was only one mass, and I missed it. And I
Uh,
felt genuinely, it was such a part of my growing up. I thought I'd go to hell, but it was just one of those things. But
yeah.
the most traumatic experience was when my brother almost drowned. Now, you can see that in the Suffolk Times because they had it in there. But there was this dirty old beach right across from the Wine Bank Hotel where my mother was working at the time, behind the laundromat. And there's a dirty beach. No one swam there. But one day, my mother took us over there and just left us there. And I didn't think anything about it. I remember I was wading in the water, and I looked up, and my brother was gone. I didn't see him anywhere. And all of a sudden, I saw all these people coming running towards the beach, and Joe Turner, the older of the two Turner boys, he went in and pulled him out, and he was going down. He was really in bad shape. And I remember the huge crowd that came, and the police car rolled up, and a guy named Frank Stanislaus, he was working with the road department. He was carrying my brother, and my brother was hanging out of the police car window and just throwing it up or whatever. And they took him to the hospital and they pumped him out. But I really think there was some brain damage to my brother because yeah, as far as I'm concerned, there was some danger there
Yeah.
and damage real damage.
Mm. And then I guess we could move towards, did you know what you wanted to do coming out of high school?
Coming out of high school, what I always wanted to be was a doctor, but my grades and math and science just there's no way I could. Jonathan Sperling, Dr. Sperling's son, we were really close, and he was always telling me, John, I mean, I have to say, I wouldn't have gone to college without him because he was always saying, John, when we go to college, when we go, and I'd say, okay, I never ever thought of going to college. It just never entered my mind. I didn't. I just didn't say how can I ever go to college? It's just not in the cards. And then I'll never. Well, I always I'll never forget. But I remember when I was a senior, Mrs. Diller, who was the guidance counselor, and she didn't have any good feelings for me. But anyhow, she came in and said, "Who wants to take the Regent Scholarship test?" And I just said, "How much does it cost?" And she said to me, "It doesn't cost anything, but I don't think your grades qualify you for it." I said, "Why don't you go check?" So she wanted to show me, so she went down to the office, checked, came back up and said, "You qualify by a 1600ths of a point." I said, "That's good enough. I'll take it." And then I took the test, and fortunately, I got a scholarship. And I got it because there's no one in my class that read more books than I did. I was a voracious reader. Had I not got that scholarship, I would not have gone to college. That's the first time I thought, well, maybe I can. And then, even though someone probably more deserving than I, we competed for what they call was the Lillian Memorial Scholarship, and I got that too. And I just did, and I applied to go to Albany State Teachers College, and I got in. So that's that. But I was not a good student.
Mm. And there wasn't much opportunities coming out of high school in Greenport in terms of jobs.
No, that's it. And the guidance counselor actually told me, said, John, you ought to think of getting a job in the A&T. Well, that's what she said. And that was the last thing. If I had not, if I had not gone to college, there's not a doubt in my mind I wanted to go in the service. And my mother always said that's how you pay your dues for living in America. You serve, you go in the service. There's never any doubt in my mind that I would go in the service. I look forward to it. And had I not gotten into college, I would have gone in the service.
Yes. And that you graduated high school in 1957?
Yes, class 57.
And then would you go up to Albany
Yeah, well,
for
first time
college?
the first time I went there, I took the train. First time I ever been on, and the second time I ever been on, took the train and got out to the dorms and went in. I was on my own, and I just took the train. I loved college. That was what an enlightenment that was.
What did you major in?
History.
History.
Yeah.
And then, so after college, did you come back to Greenport?
Oh no, I had no intention of coming back to Greenport.
Yeah.
I I had learned Russian and German in the army, and I wanted to go to graduate school and get a master's. And then excuse me, then I wanted to teach. But one day, I just saw a sign in in the student union at Michigan State, CIA interviews today, and I never thought, I'd get a job or anything. They fooled me. I mean, they offered me a job, so that was it. And I loved my time at the agency. It was really good.
How long did you work for the CIA?
31 years.
Wow.
I liked it. I really did. Worked in 40 countries, and thought that was pretty good.
And did you also you were also working for the CIA while with Vietnam going on?
Oh yeah, I lived in Vietnam for 4 years. Our older son was born there.
And did you have different types of jobs throughout your time there? And
No, I did. The only thing I did, I was a polygraph examiner. That was my only job with the CIA.
so what like for people that might not know, what does that entail?
Giving polygraph tests to prospective employees, to our agents that we recruited, to that was it. I did over 5,000 cases, and
Wow. So
it was good. It really was.
but did they have to train you a bit in terms of how to
Oh yeah, the mechanics of polygraph, yes. But they hired me because of my languages. I studied Russian for a year in the army, German for oh German for about 8 months, intense total immersion courses, and let's see, and I took 2 years of Spanish in college, and then I married a bilingual Latina. So my Spanish is my best, and it's not, I'm not fluent. I never say I'm fluent, but I can carry on a conversation and make myself understood.
and then were there any interesting stories while doing those polygraph?
Oh yeah, many. I mean, test on double agents and criminals, and it's kind of interesting. It's certainly not infallible by any stretch of the imagination, but it was really, but with me, you might have guessed I like to talk, but but anyhow, having someone that has to listen to me that's a gift. But I enjoyed it. I really did. I like the interaction with people. I thought it was, and I always know I'd teach again sometime. And I think the experience really helped me be a better teacher.
Mhm. And is that how you ended up with working for the CIA? You ended up retiring in Virginia,
Yes, yes.
but throughout, because you had left Greenport in,
The last time I was really in Greenport, the last time I was in 1961. And then I went to, uh, I went in the Army, and then from the Army I went to Michigan State. So I didn't have a car. I couldn't travel back and forth as much as I would have liked to. But I love Greenport, but I just, I probably could have get a job as a teacher, but the money the CIA was offering me, I could not turn that down. And that looked interesting.
yes. When was the last time you came to Greenport?
Oh, I was in Greenport. The last time was not this last reunion, the one before, and I went to a funeral out there. But really, the world's a better place when I'm not driving. So I don't, I just don't get out there as much. And I really wanted to go to the last reunion, but
Yeah.
I was just not able to. Those reunions are great, and those
And you wouldn't want to take the train or the bus up.
well, I don't mind it, but the connections were really tough to make. It would take me all
Yeah.
day to get there. I could take the train, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. The first time I came back to Greenport after after the army, I wanted to visit my mother's grave, and I took the train from New York City out. And just as we crossed, where that bridge is in Ashmarnick,
Yes.
just as we passed there, I'm sitting kind of dozing off, and a rock hit the window right next to me. I mean, really, ooh, some kid had thrown a rock. But I came into Greenport. I found a place to stay, just went around visiting people. And, when I was growing up, I don't think there was a person in Greenport I didn't recognize or know. Every year that I've been back since, there are fewer and fewer people that I recognize. It's not the town in which I grew up. It just isn't.
Yes. I mean, obviously, even when you went to the last reunion, besides just not recognizing the people, but even just does the village feel similar in terms of the buildings and, or even that looks different?
Well, everything is different. I mean, it really is. It's not. It's just not the place where I grew up, and
Yeah.
I'm melancholy about that. I could not, I could not have had a better place to grow up than Greenport. It was just, uh, I never experienced any prejudice or whatever. And first time, well, it was just a good place for me, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we've mentioned the changes and it's not affordable anymore either
Oh, absolutely,
with the
absolutely.
housing and
Yeah.
which is unfortunate because that's also pushing a lot of the locals out.
Oh, absolutely. Even they can't afford to live there.
Yes.
I remember Jack Haney telling me I was very always stay close to the Haney family, but a house on their street was just sold for over 300,000. This was a few years ago. House went for over $300,000. When I was growing up, you could buy the whole town for $300,000.
Yeah. And then now I think it would be more like 900,000 or
Yeah,
above.
yes, absolutely. And that's insane.
Yeah.
And you just can't afford to live there. And if you have to drive 60 miles to get to a job, that's not living. That's, existing.
Yeah. I think there's not really any of the original, well, there's not any of the businesses, I don't think there that,
I'm trying to think.
I
I,
mean, when was Preston's? And,
Preston's, it's been there since long before I was there. I mean,
and then
Preston,
Claudio's was there, but
oh
now it
yeah.
has new owners.
Well, Claudio's was the oldest family restaurant in America. And I knew Bill. Bill was a teammate, and I knew him very well. And Porky's, I worked at Porky's one summer. So that was a nice restaurant. And I have my memories of Greenport are 90% good, and maybe 10% at the most. Uh, there are bad moments.
Hmm.
I'm trying to think. Anything. There was a criminal element in Greenport also.
There was like an underbelly of
Oh yeah, and
mischievousness.
I took a lot of heat from the people back in Greenport for some of the stuff I put in my book. And I said you have to tell it all. You can't just there was bad
You
things
can't
happening.
just tell half of it and not kind of,
No, absolutely not. To me that's dishonest. I mean, for me, it was as good as I could hope to be, and I learned a lot, and a little hardship is a good thing for any kids. I often wish my kids could have had some of the same experiences. They've both done very well, but go 3 days without eating sometime, and then it changes your perspective on life. It really does.
hmm.
I can remember one of the funnier instances that happened was that after our last football game, seniors, we were undefeated that year. We had a party, and first time in my life I got drunk. And I didn't, I really am not a drinker. I can't remember the last time I drank anything alcoholic. And for other people, I just don't like it. Then I got drunk. And Saturday nights, the movie house was always crowded. I mean, that was the one night it was always crowded. And I went in the movie and sat with Carl and Mike Kaplan, two great guys. And I remember Bugs Bunny showed up on the screen, and I stood up and made like a rifle. Pow! Gotcha, Bugs. And I didn't think a lot about it. Well, the next day I was working. Sunday morning after mass, I was working in Bub's gas station, and guys were riding by. Pow! Gotcha, Bugs. You know, everybody in town knew it. I mean, it spread like wildfire. Well, I go to school Monday morning and in an intermediate algebra class. When I walked in, Mr. Eger had his back to the class. He was writing on the blackboard. Everybody sits down, and he turns around. Pow! Gotcha, Bugs. I mean, it was everybody in town knew that John Sullivan had gotten drunk, but that's a harmless kind of thing. You know, these things happen, but again, I was not stigmatized because of it. It was, if there was a stigma, frankly, it was being on welfare in a sense. My mother worked off and on, and you know, at times it's tough. But again, I'm very pleased with how it all turned out.
Yeah. I mean, you think within the high school there were a lot of the kids struggling, or was it
No,
very?
and I'm not exaggerating. I was the worst dressed kid in high school, absolutely the worst. And another thing is, I don't know how this will sound to you, but what year was it? My junior year in high school, I got one of my front teeth knocked out. And I went through the rest of high school, you know, year and a half of high school with one front tooth. That did not do much for my social uh, getting around. I mean, it was really, really bad. And I remember Miss Walsh, the world history teacher, telling me one time, she knew I had already got my scholarship, and she was saying, John, you really ought to get that tooth fixed because, you know, when you go to college, it's not going to do you much good. So I I was working. I saved up $80, and Dr. Golden put a flip in, and that lasted until I got in the army, and they put a really good bridge in. But other than that, I mean, I had a lot of friends. I was not, but I couldn't. My, my biggest regret in high school is I never learned to dance. I mean, because I missed out on so much fun. I really did.
You your biggest regret was what?
That I never learned to dance. I
Uh,
really, I mean, that's a big, I mean, you go to these dances and you see these football players can't dance and their girlfriends dressed to the nines and they can't. I mean, it's a real social opening. And
mhm. Was that something that with the church that you just felt?
oh no, well, uh, it, no, I wanted to learn to dance. I dance now and I love every minute of it. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Dancing, my granddaughter just got married, and dancing with her was one of the best experiences of my life. I just loved it. But the thing is, dancing lessons were on Monday night, and Monday nights I worked in the bowling alley. I couldn't go.
Hmm.
So that's all there was to it.
Yeah. And you wouldn't really eat out at restaurants.
Oh, rarely. No, absolutely not. I mean, that was out of the question.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the only times we really ate, we'd have a these athletic banquets. We won the championship. We had a big banquet. Those were the best meals I ever had when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Really, they were just I love them. We all I well, two of them were at Mitchell's. One of them was at Porky's. Yeah, we had one losing season, so we didn't get a banquet at the end of that season. But the
Yeah.
two dinners at Mitchell's were great, and so was the one at Porky's. I mean, so you know,
Yeah. And just thinking back to Greenport and like in terms of Greenport shaping you as a person growing up there and even to this day, important,
It was a tremendous influence on me.
even in that you needed to leave, but even still growing up there, the importance.
Oh yeah, and I just could not have grown up in a better place. People are always good, really good to our family. I mean, it was so decent and kind. Absolutely. And what that did for me, I came out of Greenport thinking that if people have the choice, they'll pick the good thing to do, because I never experienced any real unkindness. Now,
Mm.
there were kids, bullies that picked on me sometimes, and that wasn't good. But for the most part, I had a bad experience with a guy. He picked me up, and he was really stalking me. And you know where the Clark's Beach is?
Yes.
Okay. I used to cut the lawn there. And one day I'm walking, and I used to walk up there from where I lived. And one day I started to walk home, and this guy came home and picked me up. And just as he when we got to the corner where I lived, he said, "Would you like to go up to let's play this afternoon?" And I knew I'm not naive. I said, "No, thanks." I didn't think anything about it. School was about to start, and I was at football practice. And Ken Mosley said to me, "John, there's a guy parked over there. He's looking at you." And it was the car of the guy. And I said, "Okay." So then I'd go home for lunch at noon, and it was parked on the corner. And I said, "Okay." And I went down and I told the police that I knew them. I got the guy's license number. And I walked down by myself, and Bud Goldsmith, not one of my favorite police, but anyhow, God, and he and a couple other cops were there, and I told them what happened. And Bud used to call me Dick Tracy. He said, "Well, Dick, here's what we want you to do. We want you to let him pick you up, and we'll catch him in the act." I said, "Not with me, you won't." I said, "Okay." So the next day, the guy was still there, and my brother and another guy, Fred Randall, they went over, and Fred Randall pulled him through the window of the car, said it'd be a good idea if you didn't show up here anymore. And that's the last I heard of him. It was just,
Mm.
but oh well. But again, I I don't think I think I had a realism that a lot of other kids didn't have. But in terms of social graces, I'm a little less unprepared than some. But I read a lot, and who was it? The books of John O'Hara. They gave me a perspective on society that really was a good lesson. And I was crazy about military books. Read everything I could. It was just, I knew I would have sold my soul if I could have gotten into the Naval Academy, but my eyesight just wasn't good enough.
Mm.
And there were other things too. I didn't have the grades, but I didn't know it then. But anyhow, if I
Yeah.
had if I had that part of my life to do over again, if I have to pick one thing, and this may sound silly, but if I had to pick one thing, it would be to learn how to dance.
Learn how to dance.
Absolutely, because I know I could see how much fun I was missing, on which I was missing out. I love to watch these good. Fred Astaire is one of my favorite dancers of all time. I just love watching him dance.
Mm-hmm.
But the ethnicity was really it was a Catholic, uh, Polish, Italian, for the most part, Irish, and mostly Catholic. That was good for me.
Yeah. Those are the people that were in the church.
Well, like they were members of the parish. Yes, we had a big, a real mixture of ethnicity in the church. Not one black, not one black,
Mm-hmm.
and it was very racist.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. In all 4 years of high school, I only saw one kid, one African American, in a algebra or upper anything a higher academic program, not one. And that was, I thought, very, very unfortunate. It was just, I can remember coming out of, coming out of a movie one night, and a guy, an African American driving the car, apparently was going a little bit, he didn't stop fast enough, and the cop, boy, you better keep those black eyes open. I mean, he really went after this guy. The guy said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And I know the cops, when they arrested a black, that black was in for a hard time. Other than that, not much racism. I never really saw any anti-Catholicism. I didn't see any, anti-Semites. I mean, John Spurlin was my best friend for many years. Nathan
Yeah.
Golden was a neighbor and a good friend, and Oscar Golden was a really good neighbor. And Mr. and Mrs. Golden in the summer, and this I really loved this. They had a son, Nathan, that was a year younger than I and played with him a lot. But in the summer, on certain nights, Mr. and Mrs. Golden would drive us all up to Town Beach to watch the sunset, and then they'd buy us ice cream cones, and that was a wonderful thing. They were. I was very impressed. And when my son, oldest son, was born in Vietnam, Mr. Golden sent her to send $5 as a token. I really appreciated that. Very good man.
Yes. And I was curious with even within high school, a lot of people that I've talked to have talked about Coach Van Digny,
Oh, Ben Digny.
Van Digny, and
Yeah.
that he was kind of a role model or inspiration for
Oh,
people.
yeah. He was. I liked him. He was after my time as a coach. Uh,
Okay.
I knew him. He was a teacher. He was a junior high school teacher. Very, very popular. And one of the worst kids in the history of Greenport was a guy named Ron Cordy, Quarty. He was absolutely psychopathic. I mean, no question about it. And people were afraid of him. And he beat up, grabbed a vice principal one day, threw him up against the fence. Well, Vendigny picked him up one day and threw him right up against the tennis court fence. I mean, he didn't mess with Vendigny. But
Yeah.
Ron Cordy was, he had a heart attack when he fell off a building. It was being constructed. He was murdered, but he was an absolute a sociopath, psychopath. He really was.
Wow. Huh.
But again, that was the underside of Greenport. He had a cousin, uh, the Waterhouses. Roger Waterhouse was a degenerate son of a bitch. Didn't like him at all. But he had a brother, Chester, who he was on death row longer than anyone in the history of the United States. And he finally was executed. He was on death row for, I think, almost 30 years down in Florida.
He's from Greenport.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They lived
What's
on
his name?
Waterhouse, Waterhouse. His one of his aunts. When I commented on that, I said I was taught in my book. I was talking about the underside of Greenport, and I brought up this kid who he originally he beat a lady to death, raped her, and she was 80 years old. But he was on drugs at the time, but he got sentenced to 25 years. That means 12 years, and you can get parole. He was out after 12 years, and he came back to Greenport, and he had some problems here, so he moved down to Florida, where he picked up a girl in a bar, took her out on the beach, slit her throat, and killed her. And they finally caught him, and uh, um, and he was sentenced to death, but it took him over 30 years to get it done.
Hmm.
I think one of the Suffolk Times reporters actually went down to Florida to interview him.
I think it was Troy Gustafson,
Yes, it was.
and they went down to Stark, Florida.
Yep, absolutely. That's where he's on death row. Yes.
Wow. Huh. But do you
But
think for discipline at that time in school? Were the teachers pretty strict or?
Yeah, for yeah, they really were. I would have to say yes, they were. I mean, I remember the teacher in fourth grade, Miss Simpson. She almost took my head off with a slap. But no, discipline. Now, a wonderful teacher. I mean, he was an old-fashioned, really good teacher.
Who was
We
that?
used to have, you know what a snapper pole is? Mr. Douglas Tompkins, Tompkins. You know
Okay.
what a snapper, you know what a snapper pole is? It's a
No.
very long bamboo pole. And Mr. Tompkins used to sit in the classroom without, and he'd tap someone to get their attention or something, or call on them. He'd do that. Well, one day, uh, he this was going to discipline a kid, and he actually picked up the pole and started blowing down to him. And the kid, honest to God, he was a black kid, but he was one of the nicest kids you'd ever want to meet. And Tompkins told him, take your punishment like a man. And he said, Mr. Tompkins, don't you hit me with that pole. And Tompkins tried to hit him. He knocked Tompkins cold. I mean, he literally one punch, he just knocked him cold. Well, he got kicked out of school, obviously. And Mr. Tompkins never came back to class. And I really liked him. He was a good teacher.
Hmm. And then also, even at your time in high school and middle school, would you go over by the railroad tracks and play over
Not
there?
Oh, I lived a block from the railroad tracks on Fifth Street, right, 512 Fifth Street, and it's less than a block to the railroad tracks. So I didn't have to. A lot of kids had to cross the tracks going to school. But when I was in kindergarten, my best friend was a guy named Chris Montgomery, who was a classmate. He still lives in Greenport. A good historian. I mean, he really is. He knows a lot about. He married really, really good kid. But we were walking home. He lived right on the tracks, literally next to the tracks. And I was walking home with him, and I tripped and I hit my head on the track, and I was just covered with blood. And he started crying, and I started crying. I ran home. And the lady taking care of me took me to the doctor. Didn't, but we both got scared because my face was just completely covered with blood. Well, you didn't play. We used to play on top of the railroad cars, and I know, the railroad,
You
the
would go
railroad.
on top of the cars?
Oh yeah, and I remember in particular one of the big macho things to do back in those days was the train ended in Greenport, and then some of the cars would go right out to the end of the dock, and guys would get on that, climb up on top of the cars, right up top of the cars, and just before it got off the dock, they dove over the main dock and the little dock, and it was dangerous. And I remember Jimmy Fitzpatrick, who ended up a cop in South Hall Town cop. I mean, I saw other guys do it, but he would dive over the main dock and the little dock, and that was dangerous. No question about it.
Yeah. There were the trains that people would take into the city, the commuter with the Long Island Railroad, but was there more freight?
Back in the day, there was more. I would say there was more freight. There weren't. I'll say this: there weren't many east of Riverhead who commuted to New York. The train was just too slow. I mean, you didn't commute from Greenport to New York on the train. Well, the traffic wasn't that bad, and and it was expensive, so there weren't that many
People that were
people.
using it.
There were very few who worked in New York and lived in Greenport. I guess there was some, but I never really knew any of them who did that.
Did you take the train from Greenport to New York City?
Only the only times that I ever did that was when I went to college, and I traveled from Greenport up to Albany by myself, and I didn't know, I didn't even know, well, I knew from my ticket I had to change trains, and I was really worried. I mean, until I went to Albany, I never really I went to New York City for baseball games. The Twilight League would have a bus one game every summer. We'd go to either Ebbets Field or the Polo Grounds. But other than that, I never went to New York City. The
Hmm.
only time I ever When I was a senior in high school, I found out I had two relatives who lived in New York. So on the way back from our Washington trip, I stayed in New York and went and visited this aunt and uncle that I had in New York. But other than that, I never got into New York City. And traveling to Albany, what was fortunate was Mrs. Park, Sue Park's mother, they were going into New York that weekend. And Mrs. Parks actually took me in a taxi over to, went going from Grand Central to Penn Station, no, Penn Station to Grand Central Station. That was so nice of it. It was so typical of what Greenport people would do.
But when you did go into the city, what did you think of it? Was it just,
I was awed by it, the tall buildings, just the sheer crowds. It was a I don't know if it measured up to my expectations. Oh, I remember uh, uh, Father Carmody used to take the altar boys in to the Barnum and Bailey Circus, and that's the only time I ever really walked around New York. I remember walking by Jack Dempsey's restaurant and Father Carmody's, and Jack Dempsey was actually in there talking to some and
oh,
pointed it out, and Father Carmody pointed it out to me. But that's the only time I ever walked in New York until I was in college.
okay. And also, I was curious within Greenport, you mentioned some of the shops, but that you would go into as a kid or teenager, but was the coronet was there at
Oh,
that time?
yes, yeah, the Coronet was there.
But would you go in there that often or just
We went there a lot after football games. I remember like Porky Slajewski would give the coach, here's $100, take him to the Coronet after the game if they win. I would say the Paradise Suites was more popular. For me, I like the ice cream in the Paradise Suites more. That was really good ice cream.
yeah,
But I knew Jerry King, the owner of the Coronet, very well.
okay. Um, and did you work at the Colonial Drugstore?
Yes.
How was that? Was that a meeting place for people?
Oh, the Colonial Drugstore was not a meeting place at all. The meeting place. Well, there weren't many girls that went into uh,
Across the
Rouse's
street.
right across from the movie. That was the main meeting place, no question about it. But you didn't see, if you will, I hate to put it this way, you didn't see the nice girls not go in there and hang out with the other kids. They just didn't do it.
The nice girls didn't go.
They didn't hang out after school in Rouse's. It just wasn't proper. I mean,
Oh,
because there were a lot of guys and a lot of rough speaking guys and that. I mean, it was a great place. Mr. Rouse was a great guy, and the ladies working there, Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Ostrowski, they were really good people.
yeah. But and then could you just talk a little bit about the Colonial Drugstore though? Even though it wasn't a meeting place, but
Oh yeah, the thing, I only worked there one summer. But Archie Kaplan, the guy that owned it, lived two houses down from me. And I remember it was the hurricane of 54. Yeah, it was the hurricane. Oh, wait, was it 53 or 54? I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was definitely was 54. I'll never forget it. But it was, the thunder and the light, and not so much lightning, but the pouring rain. And Archie Kaplan came over, he knocked on the door, and I went to, and he said, John, we got to get down and drill holes in the floor to let the water run into the basement. It's getting flooded down there. So I went down by myself, and honest to God, uh, high tension wires were falling, and honest to God, they hit the street, and and I saw that Caleb's had this huge greenhouse that got lifted up off its foundations, and it was really glass all over the place, and it was really scary. But we went down there, we drilled holes. But the biggest part of that was the day after, the very next day. It was Monday when I went down to pick up the dust and clean up the drugstore. But the very next day, that was a Tuesday, and I'm working, and Bill Mallet, you might not recognize the name, but he committed suicide when he was 15. But we were both altar boys, and I'm working, and he comes in and I says, "Well, what are you doing, Bill?" He says, "I'm just buying some film." And I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm going to go take pictures." And I said, "By the way, John, can you serve mass for me tomorrow morning?" I said, "Bill, I've got to work again. I mean, I'm sorry, I can't." I was the last one to speak to him. So he goes home and he commits suicide. I didn't know that, but we had a novena every Tuesday night, and I was the altar boy for the novena. My mother was working in the rectory, and I'm in the sacristy waiting for Father Holland to come in. And my mother comes in and says, "John, Bill Mallet just committed suicide. Father Holland's over with the family."
Hmm.
And that was a very, very, I was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. But I had to ask myself, well, John, maybe I said to myself, he knew what he was going to do. He knew he wasn't going to be here tomorrow morning. And that was a very memorable event.
Yeah. And also, do you remember the Opera House in
Oh
Greenport?
yeah, yeah.
And that was demolished in 1956, I think.
I'm really not sure. I got out of I went to, I left for college in September of '56. So I
And then by the
I
time when you came back, when you if you ever came back and visited, it was gone.
yes, but I don't remember them tearing it down.
But had you ever been in there?
No,
You would walk by it though.
I walk. Oh, absolutely, absolutely walk by it.
Was it because it seemed even from the pictures, it seemed very grandiose or
Oh, absolutely. It was an impressive building, but and I don't know of any events that took place inside it.
and people would say it was kind of falling apart on the inside.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if they ever wanted to use that again, apparently they would have to do a lot of repair on it. And,
Yeah.
yeah,
And the Greenport Auditorium that was switched over to a furniture store in the
yeah.
40s.
Oscar Golden's furniture store. Yes,
Yeah.
knew Oscar Golden very well. Good guy.
Hmm. And did you work at Harry Bub?
Oh, Harry Bub's gas station. Absolutely.
And that's on the South Road going out of town, which is I think it's now a thrift store.
I don't. I've driven by there on when I went out to Greenport. I didn't know what was happening, but that was what was neat about that place. There was a marshland behind there, and I can remember going out there with a 22 and just plinking at things. But
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Harry, but Mr. Bub was what a great guy. He was a great boss. They were like, well, I wouldn't say he's like a father to me, but he really was very good to me.
Yeah. And were you interested in cars or vehicles?
Oh, absolutely not.
No.
No, I had no interest whatsoever in cars.
Oh,
And
okay.
again, that was at a time when cars were really become cars. The '50s were the time they the
Driving.
race up in Spionk. I mean, that was a really big deal. Cars and hunting were the main habits of the kids in school.
Yeah. And also, would you go to Rich Fielder Studio?
Fiedlers.
Fiedler Studio. Rich Fiedler
Oh
Studio.
yeah, I actually, I took his sister out just once. She was a lovely, lovely girl.
Uh,
And Rich was a few years younger, but every time I went back to Greenport, I would stop in and see him. I really liked him. I have 5 of his paintings, and I thought very, very highly of him. And I loved his mother. She was one classy lady.
yeah. And also, you had mentioned was there a park diner?
Oh yeah, I worked in the Park Diner one summer.
Where was that located?
That was right. Well, where can I say? I'm trying to put, you know where the East End Supply Store is? Maybe it's
The Riverhead East.
M Supply. It was right, they moved it. They moved the whole diner over to right next to Rouse's. They picked it up whole and moved it. But when I was there, it was a Ford place, a Ford place, then the Park Diner, then the East End Supply, then the Bohacks, then the movie. It was right on Front Street on the south, yeah, on the south side of Front Street. And I'll tell you, it did in the summers, you just have to lock the doors to keep people out. It was so crowded, people coming out to go fishing. Very, very busy place. And John Muscovy, the owner, was a really good guy.
John Muscovy.
Yes.
And was it, what was it different from the Coronet?
Oh, it was a Cornet, if you will, was a higher class place. I mean, none of the none of the white collar people ate in the diner. It just wasn't. We had plenty of customers, but they were mostly blue collar, and it was
Yeah, but
mostly
they would be going in more like Mitchell's Restaurant or Claudio's instead of.
yes. Now, Dr. Sperling, I used to telephone sit for Dr. Sperling. He and Mrs. Sperling would go to the Coronet on Sunday nights for dinner.
Yeah. Was there were a few barbers in town, right?
Yeah, Clayton Harrell was Clayton Harrell, Mr. Miranda, Nick Martosha, uh, and who was the other one? There was another one right down next to near Claudio's. Harry Armstrong was a barber. Those were at least four. Wait, can I think of any others? I know. Who was it that became Bill Denizio became a barber for a while, but that didn't last. But the main barbers were Nick Martosha, Clayton Harrell, Peter Miranda. Those were the big three,
Yeah.
and Harry Armstrong.
Okay. And also, would you go to East Marion or Orient?
Not much because I didn't have a car. So the only no, I loved Orient. I thought that was the best place in the world. And I would hitchhike down there and go ice skating sometimes. And I just love Orient. That's just a beautiful place.
Was very different from Greenport and not
Oh, absolutely. It was really country. I mean, there's just a couple of stores. The village of Orient was maybe two or three stores.
but the country store,
Yeah.
yeah, there wasn't much.
No, really, to call it a town is, a village. I remember one Halloween, my brother and I hitchhiked down there to just see what they were doing. And I'll never forget this, but anyhow, we built a fire right in the center of the village where the monument was. There was a monument there, and we built a fire there. And Mr. Duskowski came out, and he was, get out of here, you kids, whatever. But anyhow, he called the fire department. The fire truck hit the door on the way out of the fire station, wrecked the door. By the time they got to the fire was out. And Mr. Duskowski said, what are we going to tell these people? Connie Bunderchuck said, "I'll tell them a snake crossed it and pissed on it and put it out." I mean, it's just one of those things.
Yeah. And then you said you had, at least in East Marion, did you do work on the farm a bit in the summer?
Yeah, Brown's Farm. That's as you're going like from Porky's, you start going east, and the very first farm you run into was the Brown's Farm, and I worked. I went out and picked potatoes and peas and beans a couple of times. I did that, yeah.
Yeah. And you probably didn't visit, and then you wouldn't go to Southold uh, within.
Not really. There was not much. The only time I go
It
to
wasn't.
Southall was for basketball and basketball games. But Southold, I like Southold. Some of my teachers were there. And it was a beautiful, Southall is a beautiful little village. I loved it, but I had no reason to go there.
But do you think was some do you think there was some prejudice between Southold and Southold looking at Greenport as
I
this
don't,
kind
I don't think so. I think that Greenport was blue collar, Southold was white collar, no question.
yeah,
For one, there was no black section of either Mattituck or Southold. I mean, you could count the number of black families on one hand, and whereas in Greenport we had a definite, African American community. There was
yeah.
no African American community in the Southold.
And were there migrant worker camps
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was right up on the Sound Road. There was a rather
where
big.
the San Simeon is,
Yes, yes, up there, and yeah, there was a labor camp up there.
the labor camp, yeah.
Yeah,
Were you aware of that?
oh, absolutely. Everybody knew about that. I
Yeah.
know Kurt Breeze went up there to take some dry cleaning one time, and some guy really hit him over the head, knocked him out, and people saying anybody else would have probably died, but Kurt survived it. But he got attacked up there. But
Oh,
I know where it was. I know that they kept the two houses of ill repute in business. That's what
yeah. And would you see was it Peconic Bay?
Well,
That would that freeze over between Greenport and Shelter Island?
I never saw it completely freeze over. A lot of times there was ice there, but the people would tell me that way back in the day you could actually walk across to Shelter Island, but I never saw that kind of freezing there.
Yeah, like I heard someone say they drive their car across or something.
I never saw anything like that. No.
Yeah. But the what I think even compared to today, the weather was
Oh, a
I don't
lot
know if it was
colder.
more harsher, but it was colder and more
But,
snow.
but the thing that rarely, I can remember when it did, but rarely did it get below 20. But it was so humid, it was very, very cold. But I can remember it being 5 degrees. And I can remember going to a football game in Southampton, where it was the only time I never wanted to play in the game. It was just so cold. And one of the Greenporters who had come over for the game actually took his coat off and put it around me sitting on a bench. But it was bitter, bitter cold.
Yeah. And in the early 50s, do you know who the mayor was?
Yeah, Oscar Golden.
Oscar Golden.
Yep,
Oh, okay.
good guy. I thought, and
Yeah.
then it became after Oscar Golden. It was then Mayor Hubbard. After
George Hubbard Sr.
yes, George Hubbard Sr.
Yeah, and then I think I know the rest of it from there. Uh,
Well, I have to tell you though, I remember I was an altar boy Mayor Hubbard's wedding, and he married Eileen Dimbat, and lovely couple. But I went out to visit Greenport one time, and we went into the Coronet for breakfast, and I saw I think $1.05 for a cup of coffee, and I actually wrote Mayor Hubbard. I said, those prices are just outrageous. I said, I just don't,
yeah,
never got an answer, but that's okay.
yeah. I mean, obviously, it's always interesting looking at the prices of even looking at the
Well,
menus from back then.
the arcade was an institution. I mean, it really was an institution. And I
Yeah,
really liked Mr. Levine. I mean, he was such a nice guy and a very, very good guy. But that store in itself was just an institution, a general store. And the smell of the place when you went into it was really something else.
I know, and unfortunately, it's kind of it's just kind of empty.
Yeah. But people from the city never saw stores like that. They were amazed by it.
Yeah. And there was Jaeger's department
Jagger,
store?
well, we called it Jaggers,
Yeah,
but
Jagger.
their big business was linoleum floors. I mean, they would do flooring, and that was the biggest part of their business. Mr. Jagger was a nice guy. He really was.
Yeah. Also, I guess we could jump a bit
Sure.
back to where, because we had talked about you in the when you were in the army,
Mm-hmm.
with in the fort in Texas, or was that
Fort Bliss.
Fort Bliss?
Yes.
Um, and you had gone to Europe
Yeah,
also.
I spent 29 months in Germany.
Yeah. But when you came back, you mentioned that you saw an ad for the CIA. CIA.
No, that was yeah. When I came back, I came back to go to graduate school.
Yeah.
Now we were having a class reunion right after I got back, and I had to tell Bill Levi I can't make it. I've got to, I have to go out to East Lansing for And I never got back. I never got back. And it was just too expensive. I mean, I went to school on the GI Bill, and I was working, but I couldn't afford to take trips back to Greenport.
Yeah. But you went into the CIA headquarters in 1968.
Yeah, June '68.
That was your first time going in.
No, actually, I had two interviews before
Yeah.
I actually started work. I had one in early May when I just come in and it was mostly oral and had to talk, and then I had to go back, take a polygraph test, and then in June of June 20th, I think it was, of '68, I actually started work.
And how was that? Were you nervous starting
No,
out?
no, I don't think so. I've
No.
read a lot about the CIA, and the people were really, really nice people.
Yeah.
I like the people with whom I work.
Now, were you also, I don't know if this is before, yeah, this has to be before when you were in the army, but with the Cuban Missile Crisis?
I was actually in Fort Bliss at the time of the missile crisis, and Fort Bliss is where they train all anti-aircraft missiles. And at the time, I got to Fort Bliss the Friday before Kennedy's speech about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I'll tell you, we were all sitting in this big auditorium when Kennedy made that speech, and we really thought we were going to war. And trucks towing missiles, I mean, continually flow of trucks out of Fort Bliss carrying missiles, Hawk missiles, down to Florida. And
Wow.
we were really nervous.
I mean, all through the 60s, did you feel there was still tension with even just Russia or
Oh
or
yeah, I thought I thought the tension was between us and Russia. I never felt the same kind of tension with the Cubans, but they worked
yeah,
very hard against us. They were a very good intelligence service, excellent intelligence service. But it never occurred to, well, there's no doubt in my mind the Russians were our main enemy, without a doubt.
yeah. And do you know what you were doing when you heard about Kennedy's assassination?
Absolutely. I remember I was in language school out in Monterey, and I was the guy that would go pick up the mail to the barracks. And I was picking up the mail, and I hear on the radio they're talking about Kennedy being in the hospital. And then I actually heard over the radio, President Kennedy is dead. I was picking up the mail, and that was it. And all classes were called off, and all the Russian, especially the Russian women teachers, they were all crying. They were saying a Russian rifle, well, an Italian rifle, but the Russian women were all crying.
Mm. And as an Irish Catholic president, did that mean something to you?
Yeah, it did. I was very happy to see that, but I also thought, um, JFK was one of the biggest whoremasters in the world. I mean, you know, Catholic in name only. He might tap the rail every Sunday, but the guy, I mean, by my standards, he was a total adulterer. I mean, I didn't like that. I thought he was a pretty sharp guy, but
Yeah,
that bothered me about him. I don't know how he, could. It just I didn't think,
yeah,
that he touted his religion. He made something of it, and yet he was an absolute profligate.
yeah. And then when you were at the CIA, the president was,
I see when I got there was Johnson. Johnson did not run for the presidency. Uh,
yeah.
Johnson had just gone out of office, and Nixon replaced him.
And would you have to go into DC at all?
No, let's see. What do we have to do? Only like when I'd have to go into DC to get my visas when I was born in foreign countries. But other than that, I had to go to the Pentagon a couple of times. But for the most part, I never had to go into DC.
Okay. And even into the 70s, were you working on anything with where you had to do polygraphs with Russian?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Were there any things in terms of spies or?
Absolutely, yeah.
No, that's interesting.
It was very interesting. Some of the people I met, I were just absolutely amazing people.
Yeah,
One guy picked me up and gave me a great big hug when we met, and we just hit it off very, very well. Just really interesting, someone really interesting.
yeah. And I was curious what you were thinking with the Watergate.
Oh, well, actually, one of the people in the Watergate thing. Well, I worked with some of the Cubans. They didn't know my name or what. Not that close, but I actually worked with some of the Cubans that were arrested. But one of the guys also was supposed to be my next boss.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, there's like all there's always some kind of overlapping.
yeah.
And then what would you say your favorite part was about that job? Work.
Favorite for a while, my favorite part of it was the travel. I really liked the travel, but after a while, especially when we started having kids, then the travel became hard. But until that time, I liked the travel, and at least in the early years, may have been a little bit naive in me, but I thought I was doing important work, keeping spies out, keeping bad people out of the agency. That was a big deal. Finding fabricators who were giving us false information. I, I think on about 20 occasions, I had to go somewhere around the world because someone had walked into the embassy and said, we're going to a plane is going to be hijacked or there's going to be a terrorist attack. And I'd have to fly to God knows where. I got home from my son's baseball practice one night, and my wife was waiting in the doorway. She said, John, you have to go someplace. I won't tell you where, but you have to go someplace tomorrow. You can go into headquarters right now and pick up your tickets. They hide the tickets. And I ended up, I had to go someplace. I was there for 3 days and came right back. But on a minute's notice, these things you have to check them out. Well, I only know of one where we actually stopped a plane hijacking. We got information on a plane hijacking, but for the most part, there were fabricators coming in and saying they had this information. They didn't have anything.
You could tell after you did the.
Well, they tell me I usually get them to admit it, but yeah. if they failed the test, we wouldn't take action on the threat.
I don't know if you could say, but what was the most challenging, or if there was someone that was the most challenging to talk with and figure out what was going on in a situation.
Well, I did a test once. It took me 3 days to get a confession out of him, but I thought it was worth it.
Yeah. No, but that's still amazing with because you had to speak different languages.
No, if it's a language I didn't understand, I'd get an interpreter.
Oh, okay. What other languages did you, because you did speak some languages.
Yeah, German, Russian, German, and Spanish is my best because my wife was Latina, and we
Okay.
spoke a lot of Spanish at home. And you know, I can carry on a conversation. I don't say I'm fluent in any, but just this morning I was talking German. I was talking German with Bill Liebline, and this
Yeah.
is yeah, and I can carry if I can carry on a conversation in German and some Russian, but I can do a lot better in Spanish.
Yeah.
I actually taught at high school level.
Yeah. There were some other things in terms of just some of the changes. I mean, we did talk about some of the changes in Greenport.
Oh yeah,
It's
no, it's
something
a good
feels
word.
different.
Oh yeah, the type of population. You have more retirees from New York than you do people who grew up in Greenport.
And a lot, I mean, even now, I think today, a lot of I would say probably more, I don't, from what I've heard, maybe more than 60% who graduate from high school there leave.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. There's nothing for them there. When
But
I
do
was
you think even at that time, even in the 50s, how many people do you think ended up staying in Greenport?
a lot more than they do, a lot more than do today. When
Yeah,
I was growing up, I couldn't imagine living anywhere else but Greenport. I loved it out there. And the idea of not living there never entered my mind. And
yeah,
then I was terribly homesick when I started college. And after Christmas, I went home for Christmas and I didn't want to go back. But then after spring vacation, I couldn't wait to get back to Albany because I formed a whole new social structure, and that's where my friends were, and I couldn't wait to get back.
yeah. Hmm. Did you come back to Greenport in the 70s though one time and with like you had your suitcase and
I'm trying to think. I used to, let's see. I don't. I remember my first visit back to Greenport after when I got out of the army. I was carrying a suitcase. I was walking down the street, and there were these two girls in front of me, high school kids, and I could not believe the profanity. It just blew my mind. I mean, it was incredible. And I finally just tapped on his shoulder and said, "Where did you learn this language?" I mean, and they got really put off by mind your own business. And I stayed at Santa Cruz's. They had a little room in it, not a room, a tourist place with some rooms. And I knew Tom Santa Cruz, who was the cop, and I knew his wife. Her parents owned the farm I worked on, so I stayed there overnight. And later, when I brought my wife out there, we stayed there again. And that was kind of nice.
yeah. Um,
I thought I got a great education at Greenport High School. I didn't feel shortchanged when I got to college. I felt I could compete with the other people without any problem at all. I was very pleased about the education I got.
were there some, because I've heard some people would go, or the parents would send them to private boarding schools.
Well, John Sperling is the main one I know who went to a private boarding school, and he did that. I mean, he was my best friend for a long time in Greenport. Then after his sophomore year, he went to a very good prep school. He ended up going to Dartmouth,
Huh.
but he went to a prep school. Oh, Bob Utz went to a prep school. He's in Greenport now. I'm trying to think who else went to prep school. Billy Olson went to a prep school, but not a lot of people did.
No, and it costs more money
Oh yeah,
too.
very expensive, sure. I don't know any girls who were sent to prep school,
Yeah,
finishing schools, whatever. I didn't know any females who went to schools
yeah.
like
hmm And who do you think was your biggest role model around high school?
around high school. Probably Jim Haney was my. I learned more about life from him than any other person I met. His younger brother Bernie became one of my best friends, but I spent a lot of time with Jim, and I thought he was one of the smartest people I ever met. I really was impressed with him, and I would say he's the closest thing I had to a role model. I
And
remember one teacher, the worst teacher I ever had in all the time I was in any school was Henry Thorne. He was the science teacher.
Henry who?
Thorne, Thorne. He was just I couldn't stand him. He was rude, crude, and I know my mother knew him from. He used to live. He used to live in a hotel where my mother was a cleaning lady, and she told me he's going to be a great teacher. All that I couldn't stand him, and he ended up getting fired, and I knew why he got for negative reasons he got fired. And what I remember most about him, and I mean, I didn't hide my dislike for him. I mean, I just really didn't like him. But anyhow, I was going to summer school in Albany, and I was sitting with a guy who was actually a school teacher who was taking a graduate course, and we became friends. But anyhow, Henry Thorne comes over and sits down next to me. He says, "John, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time." And he, Henry Thorne, was a teacher in the school where this guy, my new friend, was from. And I think he was so nervous that I was going to blow the whistle on him, which I didn't do. But I just had no use for that guy at all. I thought he was one of the worst teachers I'd ever had. But other than that, I thought I thought the teachers were really good.
Yeah.
I know Mrs. Diller, she was the guidance counselor, and she really didn't like me, and I made that clear until I got a Regent scholarship, and then she couldn't have been nicer to me. I mean, she was really nice to me and helped me a lot. She told me she could have gotten me a partial scholarship to Notre Dame, but I said, look, I couldn't even afford to, I couldn't afford to travel back and forth, and that's just too far away. But she really became very nice to me. But she was terrible to John Sperling. He wanted to take French as a freshman, or as a sophomore. No, you have to take Latin first. And Dr. and Mrs. Sperling said, "What does he need Latin for? He's not going to be a priest." Well, they forced her, Jonathan, to take the class, and she really treated him badly. And I didn't like that, but I have to say, in the end run, we used to go to the same church, and I'd see her at church, but she didn't want to put me in an academic program because my grades weren't that good. But Maureen Van Popering, who I dedicated my book to, she insisted on it. Said, "This kid is sharp. You may not know it, but this kid is going to do okay." And it was her, Mrs. Van Popering, that got me into the academic courses, that got me into college. So
Mm.
I'm very grateful for that. But we the teachers and they took education seriously, and I was pleased.
What about your mom? Was she okay with you going away?
She didn't really understand it. She thought, Albany was about 20 miles west of Riverhead, and
Yeah.
I mean, she had no concept of what college was all about. She thought, what you do You graduate, you go in the service, that's paying your dues to live in here. Then you come back to Greenport and get a job someplace. That just wasn't, she had no concept of what it meant to go away to college. It was just something unknown to her. She was very supportive of me, but, it was, well, I'll tell you, now, most of the time I was a kid, we were on welfare. And the idea of kids on welfare going to college was unheard of. I mean, it just was. But, and I think my mother was hoping I'd be doing something where I could make some money and we could get off welfare. And I don't blame her. That's okay. My mother was the hardest working person I've ever met. I've seen her crying. She was just so tired sometimes. And I could understand that, but that's not the Irish way. You grow up, well, you take care, most important, you take care of your mother. And I was foregoing that pleasure. And but she never gave me a hard time about it. And I tell you, when I was working at Porky's restaurant, and I didn't know what was going on, but I was there one night, and Mr. Slajewski, who I really liked, anyhow, he introduced me to this couple, and they gave me a ride home from the restaurant. Next day, when he said, "They're going to pay for your education," and I said, "What?" He said, "They're going to pay for your education." And I said, "That's nice." Well, Labor Day weekend was before I went back to college. They gave me, this man gave me my first year's room and board. And I really, now, what had happened was earlier in that week, I had a real confrontation with the chef. I mean, to me, he was a real SOB. And Mr. Slajewski and his wife had been out. They went away for the day to go someplace and have dinner with friends or whatever. But anyhow, when he came back, the chef had a meeting with Mr. Slajewski, and Mr. Slajewski came back in the kitchen, and he just tore me up. I mean, he didn't mince words at all, and it was, if I could have afforded to, I'd have take the job and shove it, but I couldn't afford to do that. And I finally decided, and my mother really didn't like this, but I finally decided I don't want to owe my education to this guy. And I gave the check back. And Mr. Slajewski was really mad at me, but I told him, Mr. Slajewski, I appreciate it. I really don't need it. I have a job up in Albany, but thanks for the offer, but no thanks. But that was a kind of an interesting thing to me. And when I went into the barber before going back to college, and the barber told me, it was Mr. Mazo, he said, "John, Porky was in here complaining about how you turned his money down. He called you an ungrateful kid." And I said, "Well, that's okay, but I like Mr. Slajewski, and that's all. That was, to me, that was an interesting story. My mother was very upset that I did that, but I just told her I cannot owe my education to this man, and I won't."
Yeah. No, because I think that's better than feeling like you feel that you got it a different way than just relying on someone like that.
Yeah.
That, like you said, you didn't want it to be that you owe this man.
If not, unless it was necessary. If it was necessary, if that was what I'd have to do to go to college, go back to college, I'd have taken it. But I had a job in Albany in one of the cafeterias and also a snack bar. So all I had to come up with was my room and board, and I had a Regent scholarship, so I was okay. I never had a lot of money in college, but I always had enough to buy a hamburger or go to a movie. I always had some money, so it wasn't too bad.
Yeah. I think just like if there was anything else you wanted to discuss or say that we haven't talked about.
I don't think so, but all I know is that if you have any questions, I'm pretty sure I can answer them, but I just want you to know that, and what I want to come across is that I really loved growing up in Greenport. And when God set us down in Greenport after my father died, he couldn't have picked a better place. It just worked out so well for me. There were people like Julie and Don Onstead, two of the best people I ever known. They were our neighbors, and they were so good. So, and I really, I thought that the people of Greenport treated me better than I deserved. And I was, that'll always be my home.
Definitely. I want to thank you so much for
It's been
taking
my
the
pleasure.
time to come on today and share your story. It was really wonderful.
You give me a captive audience, you're in trouble.
The what?
My mother told me I was vaccinated with a phonograph needle. So I do like to talk, and you give me an opportunity to do
Yes, thank you.
that. It's been a pleasure, Chris. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. So I hope you enjoyed episode 96 with John Sullivan. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.